So when we come back, this is what's going to be fascinating. You will actually find another architect on the internet called Mark Silva, and it's under Markitect as well. And you could not have aesthetically two more different outcomes than Clay Chapman and Mark Silva. But if you go to Mark Silva and you look at his work, you will see unbelievable sites on the West Coast. These are sites that involve enormous views, unbelievable terrain, water, light, totally different from the world of Oklahoma, which is largely flat, and the views are very consistent. And it is a world where one person, Mark Silva, will bond with a site, listen to a client, and create a third reality, which is a building. And I find it to be indistinguishable in its outcomes of a great aesthetic, but in its basis of extreme listening, and I would say motivation. So when we come back, Mark Silva on Homepage Radio. So in this effort, we are doing a show today called Style-Less Homes, meaning homes aren't about style, but we're obsessed with style. Homes are really about the humans involved and the sites involved and even the values involved. And with us today is Mark Silva, who's been an architect for 37 years in San Diego and does some of the most incredible work I can imagine. And before I go on, Mark, tell us how we can see your work. Where is it on the internet that people can look at it?
Hey, Duo. Thanks for having me. It's actually at markasilva.com.
markasilva.com. And I'm going to just blow a little smoke, so bear with me. There are a lot of ways to think about architecture. You just heard about Martin Peterson. You heard from Martin Peterson from Common Edge talking about how architects were designing for themselves forever, for hundreds of years, and that made this ossified modernist world where essentially it was a club, and people have tried to revolt from that. And about how the fact that the younger generation of architects, and he would know because he knows more architects than anyone I've ever dealt with, the younger architects don't care about this thing called style. They care about things like climate change, and they care about things like equity and justice. So there's a different sense of motivation for the vast majority of people that are under 50. Well, that's all true. But there's also other things. And one of the things that Clay Chapman brought up was the fact that history is literally the other gravity in architecture. The architecture we do lives way beyond the ephemeral photographs that we have, which actually makes things have a different take on what their ultimate goal is going to be. And then secondly, he uses a building technology, a technique where he builds his own things that actually really results in buildings that are both nominally familiar, but actually have an unbelievable intention of permanence and relationship to all the generations that use it. Well, Mark, I'm going to interpolate here, and you can tell me if I'm full of beans. I don't know of another architect which deals more directly and more, I would say, joyously with the places that people are built, the sites that people are built. You actually are, like Clay Chapman, predominantly a house architect like me, but you take sites to a level where they generate so much of what you do. Am I wrong in that?
No, I think that's correct. It seems to me that the design of the home has to come from the characteristics of a site.
And they clearly do. I'm going to ask you a very unfair question, but I've asked it everybody else. I've even asked it of myself, which is the ultimate insult to me, but that's good. What style do you think is? It's a stupid question.
I knew you were going to ask me this.
I know. So what does this thing called style manifest itself in your stuff?
Well, I agree with Martin when he says that an architect's style is really a collection of their influences. Yeah. And I think that's very, very much true of myself. So, it's hard to label it a certain way.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what style is, quote unquote style.
Yeah.
Seems like it's a way to label stuff, and historically that has been kind of necessary, I guess, maybe for marketing. I don't know, but I think that style can be limiting. It's very predictable. You know, if you're doing something in a particular style, it's predictable what the outcome. You know, within reason, it's going to be what it's going to be. And I mean, a perfect example of that is what people are calling modern architecture or modern developer architecture.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like predictable.
Well, I was talking about the DJ that came on before this show has been everywhere around the world in the last 4 or 5 years. And she said that what she was amazed by was that when she went all over the place, China, France, she's been everywhere. She saw this sort of accreting, growing, styleless new stuff that is buildings that doesn't seem to have humanity in it. It just has the expediency of accommodation and I guess the profit of knowability, right?
So right, and it doesn't have place.
It doesn't have place. Now, you should actually, in the article that addresses this thing that I wrote about, the professor, Dodds, from, he's from a university down south, and I forget which university it is, but he basically says there are architects that dwell in, quote unquote, place, close quote, not style. And he says that's silly because everything has style, and the idea that something is place first puts the cart before the horse because everybody has style. Tell me, I know that that's incorrect for me. But tell me how that impacts on the work that you do in these incredible sites in coastal California.
Well, I think most of my houses are different from each other.
Yes,
they're kind of unique for the site and for the program, and I think that defines the style is the site and the owner's program. And the style is therefore the solution to that problem.
You just used an interesting buzzword that architects use. You said owner's program. And I'm gonna basically say that having listened to you talk to my class on Tuesday, I can say that, and this is also true of every good architect or designer, forget about architects, the people that make things that I know, they actually put the person that uses it, that builds it, at the core of what they do. And so the program is simply how many rooms and blah, blah, blah. But I see the personalities of the people in the buildings. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. I consider that part of what I'm calling a program.
Yeah.
I try to get to know the clients as much as possible, see their stuff in their place
Yep.
that they're currently living in, and what their interests are, what they see their future to be. All of those things come into play to create something that is, a correct way of life for them, or a happy way of life for them.
Here's an esoteric thing, and I'm going to ask you to try to be as you're talking to civilians now. Here, you're not talking to the Army Corps of Architects. Your floor plans, the way you lay things out, are unbelievably. They're a binary. They're unbelievably simple in their basis, but incredibly elaborated in their end result. Do you think in the floor plan first in these things, or do you think about the whole building at once?
That's a good question. I think I do it maybe a little different each time, depending on the site and the conditions and what the solution is. It kind of comes to me all at once as like a whole idea, and probably in terms of sketching, the first sketching is in floor plan. But while I'm sketching in floor plan, I'm already thinking about, shapes and elevation and sections and so forth.
You know what? All those words you just used probably left people in the dust, and that's a good thing because you and I speak the language of getting things built, and that means plans, sections, and elevations and all that kind of stuff. But I'm going to ask you to sort of close your thoughts on this because we do have this sort of circumspect period of time here. Actually, I've got much more time than I thought I did. Oh my goodness. Well, that's good. So we got lots more time than I thought we did. And so I'm going to ask you some more questions.
Okay.
By the way, time is an interesting thing, and it actually shows in your buildings almost in the opposite way that it shows from Clay Chapman's buildings. Clay Chapman's buildings are built in brick, and they look like they could have been there 100 years ago and could be there 1,000 years from now. Your buildings are unbelievably expressive in a huge variety of materials and clarity of structure as being separate systems. They look like an amazing dance of components. Could you, if there is a consistency, and I think there is, to Mark Silva's architecture, could you tell us what color or what glass, what plane, tell us how these incredibly articulated pieces and parts, and everybody's got to be looking at your work on the internet right now. Mark A. Silva, architect. Tell us what these pieces and parts do for you, each individual one.
Oh, okay. Well, the majority of my work is for properties that have views. It's kind of a niche that's happened. I actually grew up in a mid-century modern with a lot of glass and a view. So I kind of learned from that experience how best to get a view into a house. And so in terms of the glazing or the glass, the windows and glass doors, I tend to take them very high because the more sky you see in any view, the more dramatic it is. And because you get to see the weather and the clouds and the changing of the sky and the colors and the light. So that's one thing that's common. Another thing I do frequently, you'll see, but not all the time, is what I call these spine walls. And their function is to kind of ground the design into the earth and bring the outside inside and then back outside the other side.
Yep.
And that seems to be working.
And what's fascinating too is that those two identities, the view is glass, obviously, and also then movable walls, because you want to be able to eliminate the glass sometimes. But there's also this masonry component or density component in color to those spine walls. They're almost as if and here's an interesting connection with you and Clay Chapman. Would you almost consider them archaeological in nature, that when the rest of the house goes away, the spine wall will be left?
I loved when he said that, by the way. I totally agree with that. It is an artifact as soon as it's built. I agree with that completely. The masonry that I use, either CMU or stone, is there for a couple of reasons. One is for a feeling of permanence, which is what you're getting at. With what Clay was talking about, the perception of permanence just by virtue of it being masonry, and then also aesthetically texture and shadow.
Tell me about color. I'm looking over Rod's shoulder right now. We're going through your portfolio. Your colors are so sometimes surprising and wonderful. I painted, because I helped them make the studios I'm in, we painted one pipe bright red, which was the WPKN red color. Tell us about color in your architecture.
Well, I generally think that buildings kind of need to be as neutral as possible, with a few exceptions, just to make them interesting, because I believe the color should be the people and the things inside, the life that lives within. But I do throw some color around once in a while.
Well, I can tell you, Mark, that getting to know your work over these last few years, teaching and writing, and also 25 years ago we met, maybe it was in San Diego, when we were doing the Congress of Residential Architecture work.
That's when it was.
That's when it was, and I can tell you that what you do, what Clay does, and a bunch of other architects do, actually is directly, I would say, antithetical to what people think it is. As Roger, there's a guy, Roger Scruton, that architect. He says styles may change, but aesthetic judgment is permanent. And that sense of permanence is something I want to go away and be impermanent. So I want to thank you so much for being on the program, Mark. Thank you for coming to Homepage Radio.
Thank you, Daryl.
So just remember, as Lily Pulitzer says, being happy never goes out of style. So the happiness that this show brings me and you is something that we need to continue. So please, before this show ends, go onto the website of WPKN.org. Thank you very much for being on Homepage.